introduce Stu Petersen. I am Grant's oldest brother. Thank you so much.
I really can't. You gotta talk louder.
Mike and Ron have put together a wonderful program today and include a lot of his biographical information. I'm going to have you a couple anecdotes to go with that information. Grant was born in '61 in New Jersey in a big blizzard. I was on the Cape taking a look at the centennial information, and they listed 3 bad storms: the '38 hurricane, '54 hurricane, and the 1961 February blizzard. It was quite an event. As you know, he had a childhood disease, lifetime disease, cystic fibrosis, and when he was young, it also affects your lungs and your digestive tract. And he would eat, and then in the evening, because he was in great discomfort, he'd bang his head against the headboard of his room until the discomfort went away. We tried to figure out why in the world he's banging his head, and finally the doctor said, we're going to have to change the medication we use for him to digest and carefully look at the foods he eats. Very serious as a youngster. Most of the photographs that have him smiling are from here at the Bridge Connection. When he was young, all of his photographs were no smiles, dead serious individual. Pretty much a serious student through elementary school and high school. His freshman year, he ran into, the homers were done alphabetically, and he ran into the same homeroom teacher that my brother and I had previously. And as he's there, and a guy calls the roster, he says, Grant Petersen, do you have 2 older brothers, Stuart and Scott? And he goes, yes. And the gentleman said, we will not put up from you what we put up. Fortunately for him, my dad moved out of town, and he was next in Memphis, Tennessee, attending Christian Brothers High School. Christian Brothers did some marvelous things for him. It allowed him to explore being a bowler. It improved his attitude towards his academics. It helped considerably. Then my dad moved up to the Detroit area, and Grant ran into a real character, Greg Selgren. And Greg Selgren and his mom sort of introduced him to playing casual bridge. But more importantly, Greg got him to take chances. Greg was an individual that he definitely lived on the edge. And Grant learned how to cut classes and go to the horse track, to the baseball game. So all the really important things in life, the things you remember 40 years later. You don't remember the calculus class, but you sure remember the horse track or the whatever. And he had a great time with that. And with that, they graduated from high school, and Grant journeyed to Georgia Tech. And as you may not know, Georgia Tech won a big football game last night against Miami University, Florida, University of Miami. And yeah, because I'm a graduate of Miami University, Oxford, Ohio. But that would have been the topic of discussion all day with Grant, because he would have made sure that I knew everything there was to know about this year's Georgia Tech football team. Anyway, Georgia Tech, he was a bowler on the bowling team, and he did rather well. And he had another set of lifelong friends, Chuck Patillo, Shuen, and they would play all sorts of games, and they would bowl. When he graduated, it was a co-op program, and when he graduated from Georgia Tech and came back out here, he was looking for opportunities in the bowling industry. And for many years, he was at Taylor Lanes, where he was a manager at the Lanes, and he was a very good bowler. He was a qualifier for the U.S. Open, and in fact, in this area, he was the top qualifier at least one occasion. So he was excellent. There are folks here that have run into people from Detroit that knew Grant not as a bridge player, but as a bowler. After, as time went on, the bowling industry is in decline, and Grant's health was also in decline. When O.J. Simpson was making his famous drive, Grant was in Henry Ford Hospital, and he was lucky to survive that visit. He was at the point where they didn't think they could get him off the ventilator. So yes, he's enjoyed some serious bad health. And from there, it was just a time before he got to the point where he was transplanted. At transplant, He went through the difficulties of recovery. My mom and dad were up here. I was up here on a visit. And we decided to visit relatives in Grosse Pointe. My parents had met at their parents' wedding. Well, there was a bunch of the stories that Grant and I had heard often over the years, repeated again and again and again. And we decided to try to go play at the local Grosse Pointe Bridge Club. So off to Grosse Pointe we go. And at the start, he's having trouble with bidding boxes and just the circumstances like every other relatively new to relatively high-level bridge has. And at about the halfway point, we were doing so-so, and I had a hand where I had a squeeze plate. And he looked at it, and he's realizing what I'm doing, and that there's way more to bridge than he imagined. This isn't hearts, this isn't spades, this isn't euchre. There's much more to it. It was like a light switch went off. I'm interested, and I'm bowling is in the past, bridge is in the future. And the next thing that happened is he found the best bridge club in Michigan, the Bridge Connection, and Linda Columbia. And he watched Linda Columbia and the Columbias and how they ran that club. And that is what he wanted to do. He wanted to be able to teach like she taught, to have an impact on the game like the Columbias have had. And I think eventually he did. And he's had a tremendous support group while he's here. I'm not I'll miss names, but there's so many people who have done so much here to make this club possible. Now, COVID has done a lot to diminish the club, and seeing the many people here who are willing to be here face to face to play cards is a real dream for Grant. Now, one of the friends he met here was Dan Sutherland. And Dan and Grant would travel, and Tom Allen, would travel to play golf a variety of places. Dan came to the Cape, we had a summer house there, and they would go to all the local links to play. The beauty of that is Dan is not an individual to stand around and do nothing, so in the morning, Dan would be up and he would be on one project or another on a 100-year-old house, wood frame house, so there's plenty of projects to be done. And then golf in the afternoon. And bridge sometimes in the evening. We're kind of competitive, so bridge in the evening didn't always work out well between players. It might have led to some lively discussions. However, Dan couldn't be here today, and he wanted to make sure that he expressed his feelings, and he wrote a poem, and he titled it Grant's Saga of Life. He was a little guy, but full of life, afraid of nothing, not even the knife. When he was born, CF he seemed to think it's not that bad. But then his lungs gave out. He couldn't even shout. This terrible disease wore him down. He accepted it, though, with only a frown. When it got so bad he couldn't breathe, a new set of lungs allowed him to sneeze. A daily routine of drugs and pills kept him going to climb new hills. In his early years, bowling was his game. This led to life, managing the lanes. In his spare time, it was golf he enjoyed. He hit the ball well with each club employed. After a while, he climbed a new ridge, and all his energy went into bridge. A keen mind led to success in this game. He looked for others who enjoyed the same. A business venture with his friend Mike, the Bridge Connection was the end in sight. The club required teaching and training. It proved successful, especially when raining. When he had time, golf came to mind, and off to the links that he could find. He golfed pretty well. When he was in his prime, his shots were great, with money on the line. Then one day, there was a pain in his side, and like CF, he just took it in stride. The doctor says we can't figure it out. He sucked in the pain without a shout. Then gastro issues came to light. He suffered through them without any fright. He tried to avoid hospitals, too many bugs. He suffered in silence with only a shrug. This CF disease has many twists. Once again, the problems persist. Rising temperature was the main show. Family and friends convinced him to go. Needless to say, problems were found. A big mess here, mass here, and spots all around. Those transplant drugs gave him cancer, and now lymphoma was the danger. The doctor said not to worry. We'll get you Xian in a hurry. The expert said you'll be fine. They were right, at least for a time. So back to home for a little rest, just in time for the pandemic test. About 2 years passed full of hope, and then it came, a little stroke. Off to rehab he would go. A pain in his side ended that show. Lymphoma again raised its ugly head. We need stem cell transplant, the doctor said. The treatment would be long and full of pain, but Grant thought a full life he could gain. The process began, problems developed. His heart rate high, and water retention developed. Sunday night came, the nurses were encouraging. Grant is fine, just talk to him, the drugs were working. But more than darkness came that night. Grant's organs could no longer fight. The pain was intense. That fatal night, the doctors and nurses tried everything in sight. In the morning it was clear the fight for life was now near. With family and friends, Grant could only utter, no ventilator for me, it's all he could stutter. I woke up this morning with a tear in my eye. My best friend Grant could no longer fly. So I was postponed, and one of the things I've enjoyed just seeing so many people here with the anecdotes shared. Please continue to come up and tell me your remembrance, because I will enjoy all of them. And with this, I'd like to turn things over to our next speaker, I think is Mike McDonald. Mike.
Great to see everybody. Hello. Thanks, Stu. I know most of you in the room. A few that I don't. Again, I'm Mike McDonald. I was Grant's friend and bridge partner for many years, and the business partner here at the Bridge Connection course. And got a lot of memories of Grant, and such a tribute to see you all here to honor him. It's nice. We wanted to do a celebration of Grant's life, and this is really wonderful. So I was going to give some additional memories and thoughts that Grant shared with me, during the time that I knew him, on both family, his life, and bridge growing up. So I met Grant probably in the late 2000s. He had already transplanted, of course. And he shared with me that he was the youngest of three brothers, as Stu mentioned, Stu being the oldest, then Scott, then Grant. And he's survived by Stu and Stu's mother, Jane. And Jane is 94 years old, I know, and down in Dayton. And Stu and his wife Linda take very good care of Jane and his mother, right? Also caregivers. That's wonderful. And Lisa, their daughter, came in from Chicago. Welcome. And Grant, I know, loved his mother very much. He talked to her all the time, and he was always going down, to Dayton during the holidays. And I know your mom meant a lot to him, because he would frequently tell me the trials and tribulations and such. And so that was wonderful to hear. And of course, Stuart being his older brother, Grant would always share stories about Stu and he growing up. And Grant was very feisty and competitive, as many of you know. And apparently, he and Stuart played lots of games together growing up. Lots of cribbage, lots of board games, lots of card games. Pretty much any game you could think of. And Grant always said, Stu would never let me win ever. And so whenever Grant had the opportunity to beat Stu, he would take advantage of it. And I know they always had a fun competitive spirit, and I got to witness that a little bit too, which I'll get into in a minute. And of course, the middle brother was Scott, and Scott was a professional musician, right, saxophonist. And Grant had a love of jazz music, which I assume Scott was a big influence on Grant. And we were playing Genesis from the progressive era when you all came in. That was one of Grant's favorite bands. And he also loved the band Chicago and Bob Ando. I know you say Billy Joel, and so we're gonna play some Chicago during during the lunch. Scott also was born with cystic fibrosis and transplanted a couple years after Grant, right? But unfortunately, 3 years after, got a lung infection and passed. But Grant would always tell me stories about Scott and his music playing, and we went to some concerts here locally when the jazz musicians would come in town. I think some of the musicians had played with your brother Scott, and so Grant would go up and introduce himself and introduce me, and that was nice. And apparently Scott was a real fast car driver or something, and Grant's like, I think he wanted to be a race car driver in his life. We'd get in the cars and he'd be taking curves at 100 miles an hour and that. I'm like, oh, okay. So he never said, Stu, you were real aggressive with the cars, of course, but that was always a fun story. I thought. And so when I met Grant, and he told me about cystic fibrosis, I said, I had heard of it. I didn't know much about it. Like, tell me about it. He was like, wow, I was born with it. My brother was born with it. It's a rare genetic lung disease, and basically your lung function progressively goes down throughout life, and many obviously need lung transplants. And he said to me, when I was born, the life expectancy for somebody with CF was 5 years. And I was like, wow. And Grant always had the mindset that he was a fighter and he was going to fight through anything, and nothing was going to stop him or get him down. So fast forwarding, he shared with me just kind of like the history of his medical conditions, and I was just amazed at just his will to live and his will to fight. It was truly something remarkable. And Grant kind of told me, growing up, his lung function was obviously decreased, and they would say, you probably shouldn't play basketball, you shouldn't play kickball. And Grant's like, what you're talking about, I'm going to do whatever I want. And he just went out there and he competed, even though his lung function was diminished, and it slowly continued to progress over time. So you guys moved to Detroit, as you mentioned, I think when Grant was in high school, and he enrolled in Birmingham Seaholm, and that's where he met Greg Selgren. I had a chance to talk with Greg a few times since Grant's passing. Greg wanted to be here, but he's down with his mother Margaret Selgren and his father down in Florida. Margaret was a longtime bridge player here at the Bridge Connection, and he shared a lot of great stories about Grant that we've kind of included in the in the write-ups and such. And Greg said when Grant graduated from high school and got into Georgia Tech, the doctors said, well, you probably only have 1 to 2 years left to live. And Stu, I know you said, like, over the course of his life, he was never given more than 5 years, right, at any one period of time. So the doctor said, I don't know, Georgia Tech's you might want to reconsider it. And Grant's like, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm going to Georgia Tech. So he went to Georgia Tech, graduated in 4 years, got his degree. He bowled collegiately for Georgia Tech, and then came back to Michigan. And so Greg really wanted to emphasize that Grant's will to fight was truly amazing, and he always said Grant was his best was his own best doctor. He asked a lot of questions. If he didn't like the answer that he got, he ignored it and moved on. So I thought that was a nice testimony. So when Grant explained to me when he got back into the Detroit area, his degree was in accounting. He didn't really love accounting, but loved bowling. So he got into the bowling industry, which he spent several decades. Played some, bowled some amateur, and obviously U.S. Open in a professional tournament. It was amazing. And he managed bowling alley, set up lots of tournaments, amateur tournaments, professional tournaments, ran a pro shop. I know he loved he really really loved bowling, which was a big part of his life for a long period of time. And Grant told me the story about Henry Ford in the Henry Ford Hospital in the 90s, where he had some change in medicine or whatever, and it threw Grant into a coma for over a month. And I was like, wow. And he's like, yeah, it was pretty crazy. And it's like, apparently the physicians didn't know if I was going to come out of the coma. And they said to my parents, you may consider discontinuing life support at some point. And Grant told me that your dad said, we're not going to do that. Grant is a fighter. He will pull through this. And sure enough, after a month or whatever, Grant came out of the coma, made a full recovery. It was truly remarkable. And the doctors said to him, at one point we didn't know if you were going to make it. And Grant's response was, you don't know who you're dealing with. So Grant's will to fight was, truly remarkable. So flash forward, I think by the time Grant transplanted, his lung function, he said, was below 20%, something very, very low. He was added to the transplant list. Underwent a double lung transplant at the University of Michigan in 06. Was it some?
Whenever Katrina was.
05, okay, 05. And underwent a double lung transplant. I was like, wow, I've never met anybody that's undergone a double lung transplant. That's like amazing, but truly a miracle of modern medicine. And I think after he transplanted, the doctors didn't have projections out past 5-10 years, right? And Grant's 17 plus.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Basically.
Yeah. So truly amazing. And I guess during Grant's recovery, which was about a year or so, that's when you kind of introduced Grant to bridge, that he fell in love with, and I guess you introduced both he and Greg to bridge. And Grant obviously got the bug, and he recovered, and his goal was to become a life master within a year, which I think he did, and he started playing a ton, and there's a nice little anecdote. I think the first tournament he and Greg entered was one of the sectional tournaments here, and they entered the open pairs, and they won it, I guess, which was neat. And Grant and Greg decided to start a nonprofit called Bridge Today and Tomorrow, where they would teach middle school kids, high school kids bridge, and try to introduce them to the game, and they tried to raise a few funds to give them dollars for the further education. And so they did that for a year or two, which was nice. And then kind of in the late 2000s, I think, is when I met Grant, playing at the club, and we became friends, and we started to play bridge, and we would play against Stu and Grant whenever we had the opportunity to play Stu, and Stu's college friend Bill Nikolai is here. The four of us would play quite a bit, and Grant would love it when we beat Stu. He just wanted to take it to him, and Stu's an excellent player, so is Bill. But Stu gets very creative at the table. He's known to make psychic bids, and Grant's like warning me. He's like, "You watch. You got to be on the lookout. He's gonna, we'll go pass," and Stu opened one spade with like 5 points and 2 spades. He did that once or twice, and we got screwed up. And he's like, Grant's like, I told you. He did it. He got us. And he would get all mad, and eventually we would catch on. We would catch Stu's shenanigans from time to time and double them for a penalty. But that was kind of my first introduction to playing with you guys, and that was a lot of fun, and we learned a lot. I think Grant learned a lot, from you, and Stu introduced Grant to the Kaplan shy ball system, which is basically wheat, no trumps, and 2 over 1, and so Grant and I started playing that, and that was fun. And we grew as a partnership and players, and that was always super enjoyable. So over time, Grant and I would talk all the time, and we'd have all these ideas, and we're like, if we own the bridge club, we could do this, we could do that. So we went to Art and Linda Columbia and kind of talked to them and said, hey, we have some kind of ideas. Would you ever consider selling the club? And they thought about it, and they did. So thank you very much. And we tried to implement a lot of the ideas that we had that we talked about over the years. But one of the things we tried to insist on was, and Stu kind of mentioned this, was that if we did take things over, we absolutely had to have Linda continue to teach because she taught for so many years and had all these great players. And Grant's focus on the club really wanted to be teaching and bringing new players into the game and helping new players get better. And so Linda agreed, and she still teaches today, which is great. And we have lots of wonderful teachers still at the club. Ron Horowitz still teaches a lot, Jonathan Fleischman, Bob Ondo. And of course we have lots of excellent players that play with clients to try to help them get better. And I know that was kind of Grant's passion. He wanted to get as many people into bridge as possible and make it a fun and welcoming environment. That was his goal. So he never liked hearing stories about, so-and-so got mad at the bridge table. That drove him crazy. And so I know if he was here right now and seeing all these people, all of you in this room, he would be super, super appreciative. And it's certainly a testimony to the impact that Grant made on all of us. And so, grab the water here. So, I wanted to tell one story about, Grant and I always had these little side bets that we'd have. We bet on games and teams and all that. And Grant says to me one day, he's like, do you know how to bowl? And I said, I bowl, but obviously not at your level. He's like, you want me to teach you some things? I said, sure. So he's like, all right, let's meet up at the bowling alley I used to manage. So we go up there, and he's like, I gotta get you a bowling ball. So we go into the store, I pick out a bowling ball. He's like, it's weighted, it's all this fancy stuff, right? So he then gives me some lessons to bowl. I'm like, okay, I get it now. I see the things I wasn't doing that well. And he's like, all right, you're ready. Let's you versus me, $20. I'm like, I'm not gonna bet you. You think I'm dumb? He's like, no. Here's the deal. You bowl any way you want. You can do the things that I taught you, or not. And I will, for the whole game, I will bowl throwing the ball behind my back through my legs every frame. And I'm like thinking to myself, I played games of pool against guys like this, and they usually take all my money. And I'm like, all right, fine. I'm like, surely you can't beat me doing this. He's like, okay. So we proceeded to play a whole game, and sure enough, Grant could take the bowling ball behind his back and go through his legs and actually put English on the ball to where it would curve a lot of times into the pocket, and he got a couple of strikes, and he bowled through his legs and of course beat me, and I lost $20. So let that be a lesson to you all. But that was, we always had lots of fun competition, of course, that way. And of course when we were playing bridge, if he was playing with a student, he'd say, all right, you got to give me a couple of percentage points. The student only has 10 master points. You're playing with a good player. We're betting $1. How many percentage points are you going to give me? So we always had that, fun going back and forth. So moving forward, as the pandemic hit, and that obviously impacted bridge greatly and impacted Grant's ability to play live bridge, which I know was very upsetting to him. He still continued to play online, of course, and such. But as Stu indicated in the poem he read from Dan, Grant's medical problems continued. I know right around the pandemic, he had his first bout with lymphoma, and of course elected to go on chemotherapy. And I was talking to him. I'm like, okay. I said, you're gonna get through this. He's like, what's the deal? He's like, I've got lymphoma in 4 organs. And I said, okay. I said, so what's the plan? They're gonna do chemo, and then is there further strategy going on? And he's like, no. He's like, I don't know. He's like, I never asked. He's like, Grant's like, all throughout my life, whenever I faced whatever it is I was facing medically, he's like, I always assume that whatever I'm going to do or whatever the doctors give me is going to work. And I never think about it not working. So I was like, oh, that's good philosophy. So that made a lot of impact on me. And sure enough, Grant was a fighter and got through the chemotherapy and gets back to his house and immediately has abdominal pains. They rush him back to the University of Michigan. The cancer that was on his intestine, the chemotherapy perforated that. He had to go into immediate surgery, which they resection his intestine, and he recovers, and he's a fighter, and he just keeps going on, and truly amazing. And then, of course, he had some issues with heart scares that they were worried about, mild heart attacks, and he just persevered. And then, of course, this year when he had his mild stroke, that was tough because he lost functionality on his, on his right side, but still continued to persevere. And the long-term immunosuppressants obviously, had issues with lymphoma, and his lymphoma, came back, and he elected to, go for more chemotherapy with the bone marrow transplant. And all along, throughout his life, he maintained a positive attitude all the way through. He was truly an inspiration, and he was just a fighter, and he just never gave up on anything, and anything he faced. It was truly remarkable. So as I close here, I wanted to share a couple more things. Thank you all, for coming. When we were putting everything together, we were trying to strategize on this memorial and what we can do, and we went to Stu and we said, why don't we put together a charity game? And I said, would the charity game be good after the memorial? And Stu's like, absolutely. Grant would want everybody to play. And I said, should we try to set up a fund for cystic fibrosis in Grant's name? And Stu said, well, there's the Children with Special Needs Fund here in Michigan that really was good to Grant throughout, his entire life with dollars for his medication and help, and really helped him. So Ron was able to get in touch with the fund, and of course we set up a donation in Grant's name, and we'll take all the proceeds from today and donate it to that in memory of Grant. So in closing, thank you all for coming. Again, it's a true honor to Grant, and it's really just a celebration of his life. Don't want it to be a sad thing, more of an inspiration and a memory for Grant moving forward. And with that, I want to bring Ron Horowitz up. He's going to say a few things. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. The advantage of going third is prior speakers covered a lot of what you were going to say. But we'll manage. I have some great memories of Grant. My first memory of Grant was when he and Greg Selgren came to play in some games I was directing at the Bridge Connection in our prior location. Now, I don't know how many of you know Greg Selgren, but Greg Selgren is a big guy, okay? And they walked in, and I took one look at this pair, and I said, oh my God. I said, Mark and Jeff are playing here. And they quickly made their presence known and started placing very high up in the overalls. And, you know, we knew they were very serious. Then one day, as I think it was Mike mentioned, I got a call from Linda Columbia, and she said, if you're not doing anything, she said, could you and Willie Winokur, who was my fellow director at the time, she said, could you and Willie come over to my house at about 4 o'clock? I said, what's up? She says, I'd just like to discuss the club with you. You know, my brain started whirring around. What is there to discuss? Anyway, we went over there, and she dropped the bombshell. She said, I want to let both of you know that we have sold the club to Grant Petersen and Mike McDonald. Well, after they called 9/11, I mean, this came from out of the blue. We had absolutely no clue. And the first thing I thought of was, oh my God, do these guys know what they're getting involved in? Well, they did. It took them a little while, but they figured it out. And one of the results of what they figured out is where we are right now. This is an incredible club with a very heavy amount of capital investment by both Grant and Mike. And we know it wasn't easy during COVID to keep this club viable, but I'll have another word or two to say about that in a moment. Grant served as our club manager here. He was in charge of basically the day-to-day operations. He was great to work for. He was very supportive of the directors, but always had the welfare of the players in mind. We were talking about memories and how Grant liked living on the edge with respect to his health. One of my very fond memories of Grant was back in the pre-COVID days. You remember we used to serve bagels and cream cheese? Well, that was a favorite of Grant's. He could not wait till the bagels came good. He would get a bagel, he would slather it up with cream cheese. Now, I don't recall anybody saying this, but Grant was also diabetic. And this was not the best of foods to eat. So he would have this huge bagel slathered with cream cheese, and then he would go over in the corner there and take out his needle and get his insulin injection. And so basically saying, I kind of dare you, to do anything to my body that I don't want done. Mike mentioned earlier about the Children with Special Needs Fund, and several of you have asked about that, and several of you have done some things today about it. Let me tell you what you can do about it. Because in general, a lot of people have asked, what can I do to perpetuate Grant's memory? Well, I thought of two things. And the first thing is to support the Children with Special Needs Fund. And you can do this in one of two ways. Either write a check directly to the Children with Special Needs Fund, and we're accumulating those checks. We will be sending them all in together so that the state of Michigan knows they're coming from the Bridge Connection in Grant's memory, and they will be sending out acknowledgments to the family for all of you who have donated. If you don't feel like writing a check, we are taking cash donations. Unfortunately, the fund does not have the capability of accepting donations online. We're told they will do that around the first of the year, but as of now, they do not. So if you do wish to donate to the fund, those are your options. The second thing, which I think Grant would say was even more important, was alluded to earlier. The efforts that Grant and Mike put in, forget even financially, during the COVID pandemic were heroic to keep this Bridge Club alive and viable. And they were not the only ones. Bridge Club managers and owners all over the country were fighting this. And several, as many of you know, several very, very large bridge clubs folded because they could not survive the effects of the COVID pandemic. Bridge clubs are the lifeblood of this great game that all of us enjoy. Bridge clubs are the major source of new members for the American Contract Bridge League. And bridge clubs are a tremendous social relief, if you will, that you cannot get playing online. So I think what Grant would like to say is, if you're not actively supporting your bridge clubs to the extent that you were pre-COVID, give it some thought, because this is so important to the survival of duplicate bridge as we know it. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Bob Ando for a couple of remarks, but let me just say that please do not rush up for the food. We'll let you know as soon as it's ready. Table cards will be put out at the end of the lunch. We didn't want to get the table cards filled with all the cookie stuff that will be available for your high calorie fixes. And very importantly, we will have trash baskets all around the room. When you're done eating, please dispose of all your trash so your table is clear when we're ready to play cards. Okay?
Yes.
Here's Bob.
Thank you, Ron. My name is Bob Ando. I am a director here at Bridge Connection. I've been here about a decade. If I had to summarize Grant Petersen in one word, that word would be passion. Whatever he got himself into, he was 100% in. That's just how he lived his life. I remember the first time I met him, it was in the basement of the old location. We had a Saturday morning 0 to 50 game, and the 20 of us had a combined 100 master points maybe. And he is just all into telling us how to make control bits so we can find the right slam. And he was just all into it. I'm like, you can tell within 30 seconds that he cared about every little detail he did. I started directing here when I had maybe 50 master points, and Grant had a habit of giving me director calls and what would you do? Or you give me a bridge hand, what would you do? And it was always when I was driving. Bob, is 6 hearts a logical alternative or do you have to pass? Okay, you have king jack 4, blah, 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 blah. What do you leave? What are you going to do? I said, Grant, what I'm going to do is I'm going to worry about this 18-wheeler in my blind spot and try to get to the club without dying first, and then we'll take it from there after that. We talked a little bit about the community here, the bridge community. There was a really good book about 20 years ago by Malcolm Gladwell called The Tipping Point. It said that to make any community happen, to make any movement happen, you need 3 different types of people. Okay? You need connectors, people who knew people all over the place and say, hey, I know this person, I'll match up with them, and you'll do something with them. Okay? Or I know, or another type of group is mavens, people who know every little detail about a specific topic. Or the third group was salesmen, people who are just charismatic and take the idea and just make it explode. And in the book, he talks about how no one is 2 of those. And Grant wasn't 2 of those, he was all 3. And his energy that he brought to this club and to this region of bridge is sorely missed, and there's no replacement for him. But he brought a huge amount of effort and energy in that way. If you ever played bridge with him, you know he was always on. I called it bridge as performance art. I'd open notes from say the dreaded 12 to 14. You know, he wants a low card 2 or 2 to loo. He would always every hand have a joke. It was the same 12 to 15 jokes he would just cycle through over and over again. But he was always on in that sense. My favorite hand I played with him. I had just started playing with him. I dealt, I passed, he opened a spade, passed me, I had like 7 points and 3 spades. I raised the 2 spades, pass. Opening the lead is a spade to the third hand's ace, spade back, and trick 2, he shows out. I said, no spades partner, he had a giant grin. Nope! So we're minus 350. The rest of the room is minus 1430. We got a top. You know? Everything he got into, again, he had that passion. He loved music, especially 70s music. There's this one TV show I watch. It's called Archer. It's a comedy show. There's this one joke about how one of the characters is really into drumming, and but he can never be as great as Neil Peart. Neil Peart stands alone. I went to Grant and I told him this. Neil Peart was a drummer of Rush. And he's like, oh yeah, Neil Peart did stand alone, but you know, I really like Phil Collins. And then, 8 minutes later, he's still going on and on about this. I said, Grant, my comment was a sign-off. It was not an invite. No. Let me tell you about Rush's second album. But in conclusion, no matter what he did, you knew that Grant cared about you and Grant cared about what he was talking about. And that's something that we'll never be able to replace, but we'll never be able to forget either. So that's what I'm going to go with Grant.
Thanks, Bob. We were going to open this, very frankly, for anybody else who wanted to share some memories, but we're running a little late on time. And I know a lot of you have made other plans for the conclusion of the game, so we want to respect your time. We'll be ready to serve lunch very shortly. Please don't come up until we let you know that we're ready to serve. Soda pop will be available on this table, which we're going to slide over a little bit, and coffee is over there. If you don't see your favorite soda over there, chances are we have it in the refrigerator, but if you choose to go that way, get your wallet out. Because it'll cost you, as usual, $1. But we have a pretty wide selection of pop over there in case you don't find what you like here. So again, thank you all for coming, and we'll be ready to serve in just a minute or two.